So what we'd like to, oh, it's not quite up yet, but I will talk as we go through it. What we'd like to go through with you today is just a little bit of just to set the scene, a little bit of a 101 in terms of KPIs and the RTP. We'd like to also talk you through our general approach and how we approach the KPI review. And then we will also talk to you about monitoring and alignment, so what we're planning to do moving forward. And then my colleagues will take us through their areas of expertise, so to speak, and talk you through what we've done with each of those areas. For the purposes of this workshop, because there's quite a lot of KPIs and across a lot of different areas, my suggestion is that we take any questions on a specific area as we go, so we can cover off that area and move on to the next one. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So I'm just going to add and apologies, Jenny, I was just tapping an email there if you've already said it. Look, our previous KPIs, I think it would be fair to say I've never seen so many KPIs and some of them not particularly useful. So the team have undertaken a lot of work to refine these set of KPIs so that they are meaningful, they can be reported against and monitored. So thank you, Jodie, and thank you for the team for the great work that's been done to date. And I'm fairly certain by the time we get to a next long-term plan that we will have an opportunity to provide a further refinement and iteration. But thanks, Jodie, for the great work you've done.
Great. So just going through KPIs and the LTP. So as part of our legislative processes with the RTP, we are asked to refresh our statement of service provision, which we refer to as our KPIs. And there are sort of quantifiable measures that enable the public to assess our performance. So it is a requirement of the LGA, but as you'll probably be aware from everyone's different walks of life, KPIs are good business practice and things that we need to have in place. So regardless of they're legislated, they're things that we should be doing anyway. Our LTP KPIs are a mix of mandatory KPIs, which is set out for many of our areas, particularly in the areas that are regulated, such as water. And we also have some self-set measures. So these are the things that we feel are important to share with our community that shows the level of our performance. And we do report the KPIs each year, and they are currently reported through the annual report. We break the KPIs into areas of significant activity, which I've got listed up here, and my colleagues from the different areas will be taking you through their review process. So we've got 7 of them at the moment that we focus on. And in terms of, the KPI and what we do with them, so we have an objective. So, what's the outcome we're looking to achieve? How are we going to measure that? What do we want to achieve? What's the target that we think is appropriate for us to achieve? And if we do make any changes to our KPIs, and you'll see that in the pre-reading, you would have seen a whole lot of, we keep a change record of what we've done and why. Just moving on to the next point. What we've done with this review, there's a couple of things. We've got some guiding principles, which Jodie's going to take us through in a moment. We'll also take you through the process that we went through with our teams, and also what we hoping you'll expect to see, which I think Sharon's already sort of landed, expressed for us. So I'll let Jodie take us through the guiding principles and what we've done on that.
Thanks, Jen. So our guiding principles are essentially drawn from the PBE FRS 48 standard, which is a general accounting practice standard, or GAP, and GAP standards are things that we have to consider as part of developing the statement of service provision. So there are several key principles from the PBE FRS 48 standard, which are outlined on the slide above, and these have essentially formed the key questions that we need that we've asked ourselves when removing, adding, or adjusting KPIs and targets. So for alignment, alignment is essentially, does the KPI link to a community outcome group or activity and level of service or a legislative requirement? Relevance, is the KPI relevant to our functions, obligations, purpose, or the activity services that we are required to undertake? Clarity, is it clear what each KPI measure means and what it's trying to measure? Integrity: does the KPI and target provide unbiased view of our performance, and is it clear how the KPI has been measured and evaluated? Auditable: can it be audited by an external party? Can they independently verify the data used to report on the performance? Timeliness: can we provide the data required to measure the KPI over the relevant period? And comparability: do we have an ability to compare it to previous years? So based on the above, our internal best practice guidance, which we'll talk to in a moment, essentially provides guidance comprised of 10 overarching guiding principles. And these are essentially, these principles consist of things like non-duplication, are they community focused or able to be understood by the community and are community relevant to the community to understand our performance? Is there a mixture of quantitative and qualitative measures there? And have we looked at the cost versus the benefit of measuring that KPI? Will it cost more to measure versus the actual relevant benefit that it's going to provide in measuring it? Thanks, Jen.
So there we go into the process of what we did. So the general approach in terms of how we approached it was, as Jodie's just discussed, around what are the standards that we need to achieve with our KPIs, legislative and GAP standards. We developed some internal guidance, so we had a level of consistency around how we all approached it across our organisation. We also did a bit of a sector comparison and looked at what other councils are doing, which is part of that practice. We ran a series of internal workshops and reviews. So we've done that a number of times internally within the areas and also with ELT. And the auditors have taken a look at these KPIs and provided us feedback, which the teams have integrated in so far. So there is a process, and now part of the process is going through these with council to get your feedback on if there's any on any changes or affirming that you're comfortable with what we're suggesting. So yeah, just touching back on what Sharon touched on earlier, you're looking at hopefully a set of refreshed KPIs. We haven't done a massive overhaul. We've consolidated the content, so we have tried to have less KPIs but still have a KPI that really is meaningful and not necessarily so detailed. We have revised some measurements and targets to make sure they're fit for purpose and that they're stretching us in some cases. We've refined some measures for better clarity, so we try to make sure that what we're articulating is clear. And then what we've done more explicitly in this process is related our KPIs to the community outcomes, which is something that we've discussed in previous workshops, is around how can we see what we're doing, how is that impacting community outcomes, and through some of these KPIs we should be able to see that. And then monitoring and alignment. So as we've discussed earlier, we do report these in the annual plan. Also, another point that I just want to touch and share with you all, we will be looking at what we're doing with Future Selwyn and looking how we align the LTP with Future Selwyn. So we have KPIs in those areas and we want to make sure everything's aligned. And it's also for us around, I've used the term living the KPI. So currently we're sort of doing an annual process, but what's our opportunities to live these a little bit more during the year, and how do we live these? And we'll be looking at opportunities to do that more. Some KPIs you'll see with the measures are annual measures, but there might be some that we can review more frequently so we know where we're at and that we're heading on the trajectory that we would like to be. So that's where we'll be looking at moving forward. Going down to the next page. So that's very short and sweet. I don't know if there's anything further I can provide on that front, but I think really where the value on the conversation is in the areas that we have the KPIs, and I'm going to invite some of our colleagues up to take you through their process, what they went through, and some of the rationale for the changes that have been made. So first up, I might invite Nicola and Mark to talk to the community services and facilities KPIs, if that's okay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mark, for turning on the microphone. So the Community Services and Facilities team that's focused on the facilities that are delivered out of community services and facilities, so that's the libraries and the pools and the community centres and halls, and community and economic development. The team worked through those and consolidated a number of sections. So in the previous KPIs, there were repeated KPIs about things like participation across each of the particular facilities and participation within programs. It didn't make sense for those to be all sitting there as separate KPIs. And so there was a consolidation of sections around specific activities. And also it was viewed in light of the changes to the outcomes, the community outcomes, and so taking into account that within the objectives. And so the changes that you'll see is there is also an addition of a KPI around community wellbeing. So we were measuring things like the number of people turning up at the facilities, the number of people who were turning up in programs and the levels of satisfaction, but we were actually not measuring whether that made any difference to community wellbeing. And we have the scope to do that within the collection mechanisms that we've got, and it speaks well to the community outcomes. And I think that's about the changes summed up there.
With the particular service areas that we focused on, which are more the open space ones, so that included cemeteries, recreation reserves, public toilet, and township reserves. We took a similar approach, and very much in the back of our mind was about trying to simplify things and reduce the number of KPIs overall. Because with these we can make a rod for our own back in terms of trying to find the information and making sure that we do have good processes in place so that we can get that information and report on it in an efficient way. So that was in the back of our mind as well when we were doing this. And with that, and bearing in mind that for the last LTP, we did go through a process with councillors to look at the KPIs as well, and also thinking about having some trend information, which gives you a good idea over a period of time in terms of how you're actually going in terms of the delivery of services. So we took that into account as well to try and maintain some where we thought they had value. And we also tried to get a balance between the qualitative and quantitative ones. So, and particularly with now that we're not doing the annual resident surveys, we put in place over the last few years some surveys in the recreation reserve area, for instance, with our sports clubs, which gives us really good information on our sports reserves. And also we have one for our rural recreation reserves, a survey of campers as well, which gives us good information around that. So that gives you the sort of qualitative stuff, but we've also kept in some of the provision level KPIs as well, which give us some more quantitative information around provision levels and also benchmarking those against national standards. So we've used that where we can as well. We run a program called Yardstick, which is a national benchmarking project, and that gives us really good information around where we stand with our, particularly around our provision levels in terms of reserve space and those sorts of things across the country. So we've used those as a sort of a benchmark as well. We did drop a couple out, mainly because an example would be one that we had on our playgrounds in terms of meeting the playground standard, but because we've actually already got all our playgrounds up to standard, we were just going to be reporting on the same thing every year, and it wasn't actually going to make any difference. So we took those sort of ones out that weren't really giving us good information to enable us to, one, gauge how our service was going, and particularly for the community to gauge how we were going, and you know, that we didn't have a lot of validity going forward. So that was our sort of approach. Okay.
Thank you, team. Councillors, Ginny, you were looking for comments, questions? after each team member's report?
Yeah, it would be great if we could do it that way.
Councillors, Councillor Munt.
Hi, Nicola, just a quick question. You talked about having the scope to measure community wellbeing. Can you just reference how you quantify wellbeing? And sometimes I find that's like kind of an immeasurable sort of thing because it's such a vast thing. I mean, what ideas did you have in mind of measuring? And can you just give a few examples?
Oh, thanks. Within the community outcomes, obviously there's a couple of outcomes that are particularly pertinent, being social and cultural. But within that, we use a tool called the 5 Ways to Wellbeing that is a recognised internationally recognised measurement system for wellbeing. And we ask residents several questions. We ask them whether the facilities have benefited their wellbeing, but then we ask them how. And we have a range of indicators that sit against those 5 ways to wellbeing. And so what's interesting in that is that the activities that they take part in and the benefits that they gain from fit within the community outcomes that we're trying to achieve as a council. So that's the tool that we use, and it's part of a customer experience survey response that we collect each year.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Mark, just about the playgrounds thing, the compliance with that. So my understanding is we get independent audit each year. Is that right? So, sorry, answer that.
Yeah, that's correct. We get a ROSPA 3, it's called, audit of all of our playgrounds.
So that's like part of our procedures or a time schedule of things that we get done. So that's why it's been taken out as being something to meet through this. I just want to make sure that it's captured, that we are making sure that we're doing it, because I know we are doing it, but if you understand what I mean, just for future, that it goes into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We're continuing to do that, and I think the key reason for sort of taking that one out, we still actually have it in our activity plan. It's just not in the LTP. So our activity plan, it'll still sit in there as one of our performance measures. But the main thing was that it wasn't actually giving us a lot of useful information going forward, because the target is 90%, and we're sort of at that target, and we're just going to continue with that. So yeah, it was one of the ones in trying to slim things down that we thought would be better just sitting in the activity plan.
Thanks for that, and it entirely makes sense what you're.
Councillor Hassan.
Thank you. My question's to Mark, and it's the very first performance measure. What is the national median for parks across New Zealand? Or
so with this particular measure, we're basing that around yardstick, which is and this one just relates to sports parks, so it's not parkland in total. So it's just sports park provision, but the national median at the moment is about 2.1 hectares. So it's measured every year when the yardstick surveys are filled out. So we're still above the median in terms of our provision.
would it be helpful to actually put what the national median is in brackets, so some people have an opportunity to understand going forward, being more than 2.5 is going to be above that particular average. It just makes it a little bit more readable.
Yeah, we can do that. It's just that it changes every year. So, but we could put that in as an indicator.
Thank you. Councillor McInnes.
Yeah, so several of the new KPIs are basically around achieving the measures and timeframes and the actions for some of the new strategies, which is great. But I'm just wondering, in terms of thinking about the playgrounds, that we've met that. I know that these are probably, I'm hoping that they're probably a bit more dynamic than that, so that we're actually in the sense that if you achieve it once, what does that mean that we can do better on that same sort of target next time? Like, are those going to be subject to their own reviews in terms of an action plan, or is it expected that we'll just meet the same things every year? That's not a very clear question, is it?
Sorry, so are you asking about the specific strategies?
Yeah, kind of. But if the strategies have an action plan,
Yeah.
if we manage to achieve everything that's in the action plan in the first year or two, then that's fantastic. But at the same time, there's always more that you can ever do. So is there like a continuous improvement thing built in there into the whole achieving the actions, or is it just this is what we'll do? Okay, we've done it. We're great.
I would expect that the strategies will need to have a dynamic action plan over a period of time, and that they would contain short, medium, and long-term actions, which would align with the long-term plan. I doubt that this would be a KPI in a long-term plan 10 years from now, because it will be part of business as usual, and we'll have brought up to spec the things that we want to focus on. So yeah, that's right.
Kia ora, thank you. I've just got one question, or some questions, but really one around the deletion of measurements on page 70, for instance, and it's page 70, community facilities and services, for instance, where to support social connections and active lifestyles providing. So that will be removed, and the reasoning behind that, and further down, sorry, in reference to the halls, is that the measurement we currently use is difficult to achieve. I guess my question is, by the deletion of some of these KPIs, you're confident that the insertion of others will make it achievable, potentially more achievable within reporting standards, and offer more efficiency.
So a lot of them, Shane, although they look like deletions, because there were wholesale word changes around it, it was the rewriting of the objectives, and it was the bringing together of multiple measures that measured the same thing, but just in different areas. And so I think it appears like there's a lot more deletions than there are, and they're actually replaced by other KPIs that are just a bit more consolidated.
Yep, that answers my question. Thank you very much. Councillors, there being no more questions, the next report, Jenny.
We've got democracy, so there's just a couple of them, and I might just invite Sarah up.
Thank you. Kia ora, team. Are you ready?
So my section is very quick. The change, there's one measurable that we have in there for a KPI, and that is looking at increasing the number of opportunities that people have to engage with annual plan and long-term plan. I guess the changes come about because of the increased accessibility of digital technology that we have, and also just, I guess, a reflection of the team getting more savvy in terms of being able to record and measure. No, yeah. But mostly related to the digital side of things, helps us to be able to measure better than what we have before.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Council? There being none. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Come on up, Ben.
Kia ora, team.
Come on.
When you're ready.
Ben. I'm more than that.
Objective.
So kia ora koutou, just in relation to the climate change new measures. So might be aware that we produced some climate change guidance for the LTP process as a whole, so that's going right the way through all the documents. But in relation to KPIs, it was felt useful and needed for transparency to show some key headline climate change measures. So these are kind of milestone output measures that will have a lot of content within them, and happy to answer any questions in relation to anything specific.
Thank you very much, Keith. Councillor Reid.
Thanks for this, Keith, and it's great to see these in here, and it's also great to see that we've achieved them all the way out to 2024. No, it should.
I think that's the measure that we want to get to.
Yeah, but we've already done it. Very good.
Councillors, are there any further questions? Just one for me, Keith, and it's been spoken about before around aspirations of mana whenua and the alignment of council around that. It's reference to that.
So just to respond in an overarching way, clearly climate change will impact us as an organisation and the district, particularly when we're having district-wide conversations, and particularly in relation to adaptation. That sounds perfectly important and a requirement of our work in that space. Some of these are also specific to the council and what we do, and there's probably an opportunity for data sharing, which we're actually doing at the moment.
Kapai, thank you.
Good point.
Ben, have you got something further there? Your part now?
Yeah. So there's just an additional measure around future sale in the area plan, so that we are doing the work, and then there's also some measures on biodiversity that Spanton can.
Nice. Welcome, Andy. Good up.
Koto. So just with our, probably the key changes to our KPIs are around the development of a biodiversity working group that's part of our, that follows on from our cell and biodiversity strategy. So so we are going to be forming a working group, so we're working on that in our KPIs. Also around a monitoring strategy for biodiversity across the district as well, where we need to know what's changing, what's happening, and how we can respond to that accordingly. And at this stage we have left mention of significant natural areas in there. We're very aware that there's a lot of conversation going on about that at the moment. So talking with Jodie about it, we can adjust that if necessary and through the annual plan processes in future years if we need to. So otherwise, generally it remains the same as in previous years.
Yeah, kia ora. Just wanted to commend you for leaving in the requirements for significant natural areas because the MPSIB has not been amended. So we need to be legally compliant.
Total. No further questions. We'll move on to the next. Oh, sorry, Ben. Please, Ben.
The environment regulatory includes the.
Oh yes,
other
please.
people as well, so, yeah.
No matter.
Not just me.
Sorry, team.
People, I mean.
Sorry, team. Welcome, team.
Who's the first? Yours, isn't it? Is it mine? Yeah. So in the Kota Koto, in the resource consent space, there's just one minor change. Previously, we were aiming to make decisions in accordance with statutory timeframes 98% of the time. We've changed that to 100. It's what the RMA requires, so we've made that adjustment.
Excellent.
Morena, in the building space, our building consent and co-compliance KPIs have remained the same, and we've just done an update on builder warrant of fitness and pool inspections to meet our statutory requirements under the Act. And there's one KPI that we have removed, and that relates to customer satisfaction survey. What we've found over the last few years is customers will not engage in that. We struggle to get good data out of it, and we end up paying for consultants to make phone calls. The information that comes back is not very useful. So what we're doing is relying on our complaint and complement process, and that's actually giving us better data, more timely, and enabling us to do continuous improvement across the business.
Kia ora. Across the regulatory sector, we have animal control, food, health, compliance and monitoring, and all of our KPIs remain exactly the same. There's no changes. It all works quite well at the moment.
Well done, team. There'd been one question. Councillor Dean.
Yeah, just under the typical, your last, I had a question for all of you, but I'll just do the one. So you mentioned about there's no KPI in there to do anything about revenue?
Right, revenue on parking. Yes. Yeah, so there will be a full update towards September, October, when we've had a full year of data, and that will be brought back to council for discussions on that.
Councillor Munt.
Yep, so following on from what Phil said, there was a bit of a discussion on one of your points that came out to us, saying that there wasn't a lot of negative feedback, but just a small amount of negative feedback, but mostly positive in terms of parking and compliance, ticketing, etc. Just wondering how you've gauged that feedback, what you've used to ascertain that result, because it doesn't sort of match up what I'm getting in my emails.
Right, so that's not a KPI question, that's about parking itself, yes. Just to confirm. So there will be a briefing on that later, and I'll be able to expand on that a lot more.
Thank you. Thank you very much, team. Prudent result. Appreciate it. Next, Jenny.
I'd like to invite the transportation team to come up.
Kia ora. Gentlemen. Hit that. Yep. I'll bang the other one. You. Oh, yes.
Thank you. So for transportation KPIs, there are just minor changes with regard to the target or the wording of the target. For example, the target for smooth travel exposure, that is roughness that people experience on our roads, the target on the urban roads was slightly adjusted down because we have so much construction activities in the district, but overall this activity measure is still above other councils, let's say YMAC. So this is where we feel comfortable. And there is a performance measure with regard to the sealed roads that we do, or the resealing of the roads we do every year. This is where the auditor raised the question regarding the performance in the 22-23 that we delivered 3 kilometers while the target is 75. So we say this 75 is the realistic target that we should achieve. And actually for 23-24, we are looking at achieving 79. So we're comfortable with achieving that target. That target right now is like say 4.5% of the district sealed roads lengths. In the GPS that was just released, the government actually set a 9% target for the state highways. So that's a reasonable target for us to achieve, and we want to get enough funding to achieve that. And then there's a minor adjustment with regard to the school travel program, that is the iBike program that is currently delivered. The old target is 2 schools per year. Based on what we are delivering right now, we are actually covering most of schools. So so the target has been adjusted to 50% of the schools. So even in the case of that, we are not getting NZTA co-funding for that. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you. Just about those sealed roads, moving from 23.66 to 75. Is it a realistic KPI to up to 75?
It is a realistic KPI. We didn't change the target. 75 was the previous target. It was just in the previous year, there was under delivery. So we were not meeting that target. It is not good performance. So we should aim to achieve that.
So in previous years, before the 23.66, we have made the 75. So the 75 seems to be to triple. So you're saying, tell me it's a realistic target.
75 is a realistic target.
Okay. My second question is on footpaths. Now, I guess I don't quite understand. It's an economic thing on footpaths. Your target is 80%, but you're currently achieving 95%. Are we undershooting on that one there? Should we be including that up to 90%?
That's the condition of the footpaths. So we're doing very well with regard to footpath condition rating, but just based on the historical performance, or performance at other places, even if we are achieving at a much higher level, we probably should not just raise our target.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I want to talk about, it's quite a touchy subject. I don't really like to discuss it publicly, but I think it needs to be talked about. With the road safety on page 63, we're talking about the 18 serious and 1 fatal. Does fatal also include the suicide crashes or not? Does that not count as a fatality?
So what kind of crash?
Suicide. An intentional crash, which is fatal. Does that count in the statistics? And my other question is, are we doing anything new to prioritise road safety at those intersections? Because we're clearly having huge amounts of issues still. And just the other day when the hail fell, there was probably about 4 incidences that I drove past following post-hail.
So suicide crashes, if they happen on the 7th road network, then it's going to go through the government crash analysis system. So it's going to be included in our statistics as well. With regard to how we prevent, say, deaths and serious injuries on our road network, we need to take a multifaceted approach. So the target here is that on average, we are seeing the downtrend. But there are many random events that's beyond our control. That's why we want to see a downtrend rather than setting a specific target number.
Can we do more at our intersections than what we're doing now?
Yes, that's what we are doing in terms of capital projects. When we have growth in our districts, we are changing intersections from uncontrolled intersection to controlled intersection roundabouts, and then traffic signals, and also we're doing a lot of the safety improvements here and there.
Thank you very much, you. Very good targets, adjustments, and answer. Thank you. Next.
Thank you.
The next one we have is internal council services, which between Pam Ellison and myself, we will cover off. The first one, because I've got the mic, I'm going to go ahead. We haven't really changed the ones that we already had in there for the annual plan and the LTP. So those are retained. Pam, I might get you to speak to the...
With regards to the KPIs that we have for the rates, there's only minor changes to reflect the population change and the increase of cost of living pressures on people.
Good one.
And unfortunately, Chantal hasn't been able to join us today, but we have implemented or put in 3 new targets for customer services. We didn't have any customer services targets previously. So we have introduced 3 of them around complaints acknowledgement, custom calls met, and how we deal with service requests.
Sorry. Just with regards to the collection of rates, we often have in our financial reporting timeframes with regards to the collection of DCs, collection of rates, times, by months of what's not being collected. Do they actually need to be as KPIs? Or are you not aware that that was how our reporting used to be? We used to have a report in our finance reports with regards to DCs, how much was outstanding, when they've been collected, the same with rates. And I just wondered whether we needed a KPI around that measurement.
Sorry, Deborah, just to be clear, are we talking something that was previously within our KPIs or our regular financial reporting?
Financial reporting, I'm just saying, does it need to be elevated to, I guess, a KPI?
I don't think the collection of development contributions, etc., was ever part of our KPIs that I'm aware of, or it would have been noted here as part of a change or a deletion. We can certainly go and look at the financial reporting that took place previously to see what was captured and whether there's any benefit of bringing that back into the mix.
Okay, that's sort of highlighting, whether it needs to be elevated because that's where that information did sit, but it at least gave you an understanding of the financial, of the timeframes where it wasn't being collected, etc. So okay, that was my question.
Councillor Munt.
Hi. I just want to get a bit of understanding of the rates arrears, which is collected in accordance with the statutory requirements. So it says here current performance 2.75%. Can you explain to me what this whole graph is actually telling us? Is it saying 2.75% of our ratepayers are currently unpaid rates, behind in rate payments, and we anticipate that that will pay? Do we have an outstanding amount of ratepayers who actually don't pay at all? And where are we in terms of engaging with them? I say this because I know when I talked to the mayor, to one of the mayors out north, he said he had 600 ratepayers that were not paying their rates because they were struggling in that department. So I just wanted to gauge where we felt we were as a council in terms of with our community.
Thank you. As we're talking about KPIs, I don't have those numbers available to me readily now. We do have some ratepayers that are struggling to pay. I think it will be best if we actually get a chance to go and have a look at it and report back through Alison with the information we've got available, if that's all right.
Thank you. Councillor Reeve.
It's a pity that Chantel's not here. It's great to see these KPIs, and I can't believe we didn't have something like that before. So it's good to see that we are going to be tracking our customer service and responses on things. Just a comment with this report generally is just in future, if we can have, because now I'm in my third term, these things come back to us each period, and things that do that, can we have all track changes put in it? Because it's really hard, especially when this is something that you're familiar with, to try and work out what things have changed. And it was good to see with the new ones that are green, but this has come to us quite recently, which I've looked through, and I didn't have it then and made comments, which has been passed to you, Alison. And I didn't have the time to be able to go through and then compare if there's been anything changed since we just saw it how many months back. So just a heads up, because it actually takes us as being governors a lot of time to be looking at that sort of thing, where it could make it a lot easier if there was just track changes, for future reference. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McInnes.
Yeah, slight pernickety one on the top, the first couple of lines on the top of page 65 in our agendas. So I think that's around annual plan and long-term plan, IS 01. The dates look like they're 3 years out. They might need updating.
Well spotted. There being no further questions, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next report.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Andrew up to talk to solid waste.
Yeah, morning everybody. There's one change proposed for the waste or resource recovery and waste performance measures, and that is the removal of KPI number 1, which was around complaints, a number of substantiated complaints received. It's never been a very good measure of performance in our view. We would typically only get two sort of substantiated complaints in a year. So it wasn't really reflective of what, when we stripped back and reviewed things, it wasn't really reflective of the overall service. So we basically went back to the drawing board and said, well, ultimately, what is it that we expect around our curbside collection service? And that is basically, did the bins get collected that were meant to get collected on the right day? So that's what we drilled it back down to. So we have developed a new performance measure, which is the successfully completed curbside collections as a percentage of bins in service. So as the bins in service grow, we can still ensure that the level of service is maintained at a high level. What we've proposed is the level of service for the LTP would be, sounds crazy, but 99.9%.
9.9.
Yeah, so it's really up there, and we've drilled that through multiple times, and the number's correct. So we do currently receive an exceptionally high level of service, and we are confident in that KPI, and we have the methods to measure that and monitor that with our contractor. So just out of interest, from a numbers perspective, they currently collect, with the bins in service, number of collections per month would be 250,000, and that would mean that 58 bins a week would be that trigger level. So we are reasonably comfortable with that, and that's based on historical data and reviewing that and comparing that against the sort of the level of noise and grumbles that are coming through from our customer service team around performance. If any questions at all. Thanks.
Andrew, Councillor McInnes.
Yeah, so the first question I've got, I think Deborah was giggling a wee bit about it. In 2026-27, it's actually got 99.9% of bins, so we're going to leave another 5,000 behind. That's it's just on the top line. We're missing a number. Easy fix.
26-27. That's 2 good years. One.
Noted, thanks.
That one's an easy fix. I'm afraid I've got a suggestion for an additional KPI though, in the sense that we've got percentage of contamination in recycling. Given that we're supposed to be bringing in more organics, it would potentially be quite a good idea to start tracking where we're at with contamination of organics now, and so that we know where we're at ahead of suddenly even more organic bins coming in, perhaps. Just a thought there.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, hadn't actually thought of that one ourselves, and contamination in the organics is certainly an issue. So I don't know if we're too late for this LTP, but it would be good to consider how we might better incorporate that into future ones for sure. Yep. Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on a similar thing, but I'm going to take it a step further again. Maybe a KPI could also reflect not just organics, but programs that we have in place to educate the public around the proper refuse. I don't know how to put that in better words. It could be contained in there, but just, yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Yep.
Councillor Miller.
It's only a small one, Andrew, but I expect you to have a long, glorious career at STC, but just a KPI lead should be the position description rather than your name.
Point.
To be fair, I don't think I made this table, but I'll have a look.
Thank you. Councillors, there's no further questions on for Andrew, Resource Recovery Manager. We'll move on to the next report.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, we have the water team.
Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. So there's not a great number of changes in the water space, mainly because we're governed with mandatory performance targets. We have introduced one new measure in the land drainage area to match up with the other waters. So that's around compliance with resource consent conditions. We have updated a number of measures. So to line up with the drinking water quality assurance rules, we have a new target around bacteria and protozoa compliance and chlorine levels in the distribution system. So previously we were measured on E. coli in the network, so now the change has been around having barriers in place. And we have also done improvements to our target areas for wastewater servicing, wastewater overflows, and complaints for land drainage, water supply, and wastewater. So, so this is just us doing continuous improvement in the levels of service. And we have removed the operating costs for all the waters because the annual and long-term plans and the rate levels are the mechanism to inform the community on the cost to deliver our services. So they have been removed. Are there any questions?
Thanks for this report. This is something I've been banging on, I think, since I started on council. I find it very hard to reconcile having a target, a performance measure, compliance with resource consents to discharge or surface water or whatever ones that we've got, and we're just measuring the number of abatement notice, infringement notice, enforcement orders, and successful prosecutions. Since I have worked in a regional council before, and also been on the other side in industry having to monitor resource consents, I think when we've got to the level of infringement notices and abatement notices, the issue is pretty bad. So I am wondering, and I have asked this every time this has come up, can we have a measure that is takes into account of us not complying with our resource consent conditions and then be reporting on that or something? Because quite frankly, when we've got to the point when the regional council's giving us these other forms, it's got to really bad point, and especially when it is between councils. Sorry, I'm really harping on about this, but as I've said, I've completely not been listened to however long, and I just can't understand why we still continue to have this measure.
So I would say that the relationship with the regional council on the consent compliance is really important to us. Absolutely, that's top priority. So the measure is a mandatory measure that's come from Environment Canterbury. So it is consistent with other councils. But I do understand your point. Where you're coming from.
And I can understand that, and I should have also clarified that, as I'm aware of that is a measure, but I think we can do better. If we are looking at, from our perspective, and having measures in place which we are putting on ourselves, I would like to see better targets than the ones that we've got in here.
Thank you, Councillor Hassan.
Okay.
Being aware of time.
Yes, just following on from Nicole with regards to the resource consent conditions. We also have procurement conditions as well to meet those resource consent conditions. And I'll just give you an example. It's the type of diggers that are used, including the buckets, only taking the weed off the top. But they're procurement issues that I believe still need some sort of monitoring. because it's very important that unless they're followed in a timely manner and the drains are done in are actually completed in a smaller time frame for a smaller environmental footprint, that we actually go out and we find some way of monitoring that, because that all comes back to our resource consent. So I don't know how you're going to put that as a condition, in there, but it needs to actually be somehow monitored. And just with regards to why I guess with regards to reasonable costs, this is, and you've removed it from land drainage, this is a historical one, making sure once again within procurement, the landowner was not stung with unduly costs. We used to actually go and the drains were cleaned on a time basis. It was changed to a per metre basis because of the procurement, because it was a more monitorable measure, right, with regards to being cost effective. So I just want to highlight, you know, what the background was with regards to the removal of that, and as I said, the management of the resource consents, and there's also the bylaw that probably needs to be put in there as well, compliance with the bylaws.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hassan. Councillor Glidden.
I note in here that there's nothing about sort of level of service and the delivery of rural water. And so, you know, with our rural ratepayers paying for units that aren't delivered. And so I question why there's no, I guess, level of service KPI for our rural water schemes. Unless I've missed it.
Just to jump back, Councillor Reid, so the importance of these KPIs, especially around consenting, it's important that we are consistent nationally. So these KPIs are taken up from the DIA and reported. So that's why we've done that. It's not to say we can't report on those other things through other mechanisms through council, and maybe that's something that council could look at in the future. But in terms of these KPIs, I think that's appropriate at the level because it's consistent with every other TA across the country. In terms of the water, I mean, rural water and water, it's all covered under the KPIs in terms of water quality and treatment. So that's covered both rural and urban. In terms of the rural and delivering of water to those units, that's covered in our activity management plan. So there's a minimum pressure and flow rate per restrictor. So we can use that as a measure. If people in the community feel like they're not receiving the water that's allocated to them, we do run a process where our contractor core will go on site and do a flow test. So it's not always that there's not been provided the water allocated. Maybe there's a leak on their side of the fence or tanks leaking, whatever the case may be. So we can measure the flow rate coming out of the restrictor and quantify if that is actually provided or not. So if anybody has that issue, we can look at that for them.
In the bylaws? With our own bylaws?
Yes, I think so. Bylaws is probably not necessarily a KPI matter, but it's something that gets regularly reviewed on a 10-yearly basis, and so we can bring that to council where all councils' bylaws are at some point. Yeah.
Very good, Councillor Reid.
Just in answer to what Murray said, yes, I can understand, and that's why I've made that point before after Joe had already said. But I think we need to be or should be looking at measures where it's that we are complying with our consents, and I think we can make those measures for ourselves, and it would be good to actually have those reported on as well for us as governors to see.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reid. So would you like a KPI of what you're referring to be part of this moving forward and support from councillors for that? Or Murray, will you capture what Councillor Reid has asked for?
Yeah, I think it might be possibly easier to report separately. The hard thing about going down the next level is that there's a lot of nuances. So, for example, you may have a technical non-compliance of a report that's delivered 1 day late, as an example, or a piece of data doesn't get transferred electronically and we have a technical non-compliance, so they all come up. So it's a matter of working out at what level we would report on if it's not what's shown in the nationally agreed KPI. So my recommendation would be leave it as it is, but there may be ways we could report that through to council and alternative forums.
Fine. Yep. And I'm sure you can have a conversation offline as well. So Sam, have you got?
Once you finish with this water piece, there's a couple of other matters I'd just like to raise on the KPI.
Yes. Yep. There being no more questions about water, thank you very much, team, for your report. And that brings us to the end of that.
Sorry, just on these KPIs, I just wanted the democracy piece, which is on page 59, and there's a couple of measures in there which I think are good, but I wondered about the number of people standing for election being a measure, or some other way of talking about community involvement in council decision making, because the two that are here talk about people getting involved in processes that we already run, rather than thinking about how we actually improve Selwyn households' knowledge and understanding and willingness to engage in what council does, and willingness to stand for election is one of those, is a way that we could do it. Whether or not as a council we want, who would then run that and how we want to promote that's tricky, but I just think there's something missing in what we've got here that doesn't say, I mean, citizens' juries would be another way of trying to do, what new participatory models are we using to allow Selwyn residents to involve themselves in our processes? And to me, this doesn't go broad enough in the KPI space.
So I guess the question is, Sam, what would you like to see in there and support councillors? We could put a KPI, put forward a...
Well, I don't know if the two that I've raised are right. So one could be, because it's a measurable thing, around the number of people standing for election is at least twice the number of seats available for election, or something like that. And the other would be a process that council uses, which could be around participatory democracy, which is used in other jurisdictions and involves the community at a level that we just don't use currently, to enable good information sharing and decision making at a community level beyond just their involvement in our current process.
Sharon?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That two parts. I believe that under legislation, chief executives have responsibility for promoting. So I wouldn't necessarily be putting that in as a KPI, because to all intents and purposes, standing for elections, that's a KPI that sits with the CEO through the legislation, and that's a really challenging KPI to meet, and we have to look at being creative around how we go out to promote. So I think that's work in progress, and possibly not for this LTP. With regards to the engagement, we have a significance policy that speaks to how we engage with our community. And I do agree that we've got an opportunity to review that, but I don't think we're in a position to review that before we go out with this LTP. However, I suspect that we do have the opportunity to consider how we could do that in time for the next annual plan, or actually bring some thoughts to council in a paper that's more, which can demonstrate how we can have different creative options of engaging with our community.
Okay, cool. And the other thing I wanted to raise was just, and I should have said it before, around the rates revenue. And I just think that our targets for collecting rates through direct debits is super low. And we should double the target that's in there. Currently it's 33, 37 and 40. And over 3 years, why should it not get to 80 or 90% of moving electronically, rather than people having to manually handle all of the rate payments that sits there? And a KPI would drive Sharon and the team to think about how we then move things within our community to make that transfer happen. But to me, that just seems like we're still in 1995 ways of working, and we need to be moving.
That comes back to our digital strategy and being a modern digital organisation, which I don't think we're quite there yet. And it's part of that whole package about how we encourage. We want our community to be more feel enabled to use our systems and processes without having to come directly into council. So that's part of a wider package that fits into the digital strategy about our website, about being able to make payments online, etc.
Very good. That brings us to the end, councillors. Thank you very much for your participation. Go and have some lunch. Very good.
The recording has stopped.